Hey, super quick before the video starts. First of all, thank you so much for clicking. Second of all, these interviews can be quite long, so please feel free to use the chapters. They have headlines on each little bit so you can see what you're interested in. Third of all, with the whole show, we're trying to help people talk about mental health, help them through what they're going through, help them through struggles, and just spread awareness. So by liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, you are helping us reach more people. So that's all I ask. If you get any value out of this or you want to spread the word more, like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, check us out on Instagram at The Mental Wellness Show. And that's a wrap. Enjoy this video.
Really good in high school and getting
Makes you feel on top of the world.
I can always make excuses.
That applies both for
health to kind of
what fun is it if we all looked at
that path, don't have your friends.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the Mental Wellness Show, or welcome back to the Mental Wellness Show. If anybody watching is new here, the show is all about positivity, mental health, fun, and everything in between. Today we have Deborah Fletcher joining us. Welcome, Deborah. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you, and we're going to be speaking about dealing with grief in 2022. So, Deborah, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction, and then I'll kind of let you take over and tell your story a little bit. Well, first of all, Deborah, do you go by Deb or Deborah? I've been calling you Deborah this whole time.
Either one. I was never a Debbie, so it's either Deb or Deborah.
Okay, we'll go with Deb for the show. So Deb, you're an adult educator, author, speaker, and mom of twin daughters. You also work as a realtor, which supports your obsession with snooping through other people's homes. I love that. I laughed when I read that. So Deb, if you can kind of tell a little bit about your story and why you advocate for grief and choosing happiness, and just kind of where you're at today.
Sure. Well, it all started, I guess my first experience with any kind of grief was when my dad had a heart attack and a stroke. He was at age of 46.
Oh.
So I was 21, and it was devastating. But the interesting thing was he became my poster child for recovery in terms of his own mental health. So the stroke impacted his mental processing. So he was not able to work in his career again. So he basically just, that was it for him. At age 46, he couldn't work. So they were impacted. My parents were impacted financially, but also he just knew he wasn't the man that he used to be. All his friends were still going to work. So he really missed out on that. But I saw how graciously he lived the rest of his life. And he lived to be 82.
Oh, wow.
So he lived with purpose and positivity and happiness and just enjoying his family and friends and, getting as much out of life as he possibly could, which is, that's a great way to live your life for sure.
Right.
So he was kind of my example. I didn't know how much I would come to rely on that example. So my daughters are almost 23. And when they were born, they're identical twins. And when they were born, one of them suffered a brain injury during the birth or just before the birth at some point. So she has cerebral palsy. Now, there are different degrees of cerebral palsy, and it's really each individual. They're almost like snowflakes or potato chips. Each one is different. So with her, the way it has manifested in her is she is severely disabled. So she has no gross or fine motor skills. She's nonverbal, so she can't talk. She eats through a G tube in her stomach. She's incontinent. So she wears diapers. And so that was a severe blow, I guess you can probably imagine. So when they were born, and we found out when they were about 3.5 weeks old that she was affected this way, that she had damage to her brain. And so that began my grief journey.
Wow, Deborah. Yeah, that's a lot, and especially when you're expecting a baby. It's I think we always hope for the best, and I probably assume things are going to be normal. When they're not, it's kind of like, wow, like what now? But it's amazing. And 20, you said they're 23 right now, right?
Yeah.
23 years later, and I'm curious, how is the relationship between your daughters?
Oh, that's so interesting. So they're identical twins, and I don't know if you've known any sets of identical twins in your life. but they are very close.
Okay.
They have really a really interesting relationship. I guess it's a pretty special relationship. And honestly, her sister didn't know there were any differences between them, until she must have been probably 8 or 9. And she
Oh,
sort of
wow.
looked around and she went, oh, not everybody has a sister in a wheelchair. So it was just all she ever knew, right? From
Right.
birth. This was her sister. And so they've got a great relationship. They're friends. They also fight, which is awesome. Which I particularly love. And so, yeah, they've got a really close relationship. And I know that I'm not sure how their relationship would have been different had her sister been just like her. But the impact on Emma is that she's a very empathetic person. Again, I don't know if she would have been anyway, but she's very empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And she's actually in teachers college right now. And her goal is to work as a special education teacher and work with kids that are like her sister.
Oh, wow. That's so special.
So yeah, yes, I'm a little bit proud.
I would be very proud. That's very cool.
And I'm proud of both of them. I mean, what's interesting about this sort of journey of grief is that at the beginning, it's devastating. I'm sure you can imagine. And you're grieving for not only your daughter, I'm grieving for her,
Mm-hmm.
which now, I then, later on realized that I needn't have been worried about her because she's a very happy person.
Mm-hmm.
And you grieve for your other children. So I grieved for Quinn's sister, Emma, because she didn't get a chance to have as much attention from mommy and daddy
Right.
because of her sister. And then you grieve for yourself as well. I had to give up my career. And I had a full-time job. I had to give that up. And a lot of moms do in my position. And just the fact that it impacted our family the way it did. So That's all very sort of navel gazing and sounds like I'm feeling sorry for myself. But I think it's a part of grief that you sort of go through where you say, why me? Why did this
Mm-hmm.
happen to me?
Right.
And honestly, eventually I just learned to say to myself, well, why not me? I mean, really, bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to good people, right? Good things happen to bad people. It's just, there's no real rhyme or reason. So and you sort of touched on something, that expectation was that everything would turn out. I'm pregnant with 2 babies. Of course, everything's going to be fine, right? So that's what's interesting is when those expectations aren't met, and that's true for any kind of expectation in life. But when those expectations aren't met, that's when we feel this sort of shock and disappointment and all of those kinds of negative emotions. So
Right.
It can happen with anything. It can happen when we lose our job or we lose a pet or a family member. And there's different types of grief, just as there are different types of people, really. So it's all sort of been this journey of discovering how we would all be impacted and what her life would be like, and coming to terms with the fact that, hey, we're all here, we're lucky, we have opportunities. And as I said, she's an inspiration in herself because she's such a happy person. I mean, she experiences frustrations, of course, because she can't always make herself understood. She uses a communication device. So it's an augmentative communication. It's kind of like a tablet that she operates with. There's 2 little sensors on either side of her headrest on her wheelchair. And so she just moves her head like this. And it's quite an amazing technological invention that has enabled her to communicate. But of course, there's still frustrations in that she experiences. And but overall, she's a pretty positive person.
That's so amazing, Deb. I want to touch on this a little bit. You kind of mentioned, but what is grief exactly, and why do we feel it? And you can just kind of base it off of what you've been through with grief. But yeah.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating topic for me. And I wrote my book because I was processing it myself. And I find that when you write, a lot of people journal and they actually go through a process where they begin to understand their feelings and what's going on for them by writing. So I did it for myself in that way. And I also interviewed 4 friends for my book, and each one has a very different grief story. So one of my girlfriends, she had 4 pregnancies, and she did give birth to her daughter, who only lived for a couple of minutes. And so she is a mother, but she doesn't have any children with her that are alive. And so there's her story. And then there's 3 other friends that have, again, completely different stories. And so we all go through our own sort of different levels and different types of grief in our lifetime. And so in listening to their stories, I was able to sort of weave together some common themes and what helps us to come to terms with the grief. And I think it's really comes down to that, as I said before, that sort of unmet expectations, or that feeling of having had something and then losing it.
Right.
And all of those accompanying emotions all sort of combine in grief. And we can list them. There's sadness and disappointment and frustration and feelings of isolation and feelings of regret, perhaps, and guilt, perhaps. And so all of these feelings come and really we are overcome in the beginning. And then I think what eventually happens is we learn to carry it, because grief isn't something that we can get over. And unlike other emotions, which come and go, I can feel happy that the sky is blue, and I can feel disappointed that I just used the last of the milk, and what am I going to put in my coffee? So we have these emotions that we go through sort of throughout our days and throughout our lives. But emotions are just that. They are fleeting. Grief is something different. Grief is more of a state that we find ourselves in. And there are people that have more of a prolonged, complicated state of grief, and they can even experience depression and other states that are very difficult to overcome. Grief itself is something that, if we think about it as a normal part of life and just this piece of ourselves that we can sort of grow different emotional muscles around it in order to carry it. And I know I'm sounding that I'm oversimplifying, but I'm really, in terms of resilience, I've really practiced a lot of different sort of tactics that I picked up from different people in my life. And I mentioned my father, who, what I saw in him was just a decision. He decided to get up every day. He had nowhere to go because he didn't have a job anymore, but he showered, he shaved, he slapped on his aftershave and made the best of his days in a very sort of intentional way. And I think that really helped to carry him through his life. And so, how we can get ourselves into a bad mood. We can sort of go down a rabbit hole and think about all the negative things perhaps in our lives and things that are going on in the world around us. And we can also do the reverse. I mean, we can change our mindset and we can change our emotional state by thinking about, what we're grateful for and the positive things that are in our lives. I know that sounds again like I'm oversimplifying things, but it's really something that I've practiced daily. And what I find is that it elevates my emotional state overall. So that when things happen, because bad things or sad things or disappointing things are always going to happen. You know, it's not, there's no happily ever after in life as we know when we grow up. And even as I experience other sort of grief circumstances, my father, who I obviously adored, if you haven't guessed that by now, so he passed away in 2020, and it was finally his heart that gave out. He had that heart attack at the age of 46 and survived, but it had certainly been weakened, and so we knew that he only had a few days to live, and we all gathered around him, and we actually were holding him, like his whole family was holding him as he passed. And
wow.
It was a beautiful experience because he was so peaceful with it. I mean, obviously he was disappointed, as anybody would be, but he knew that he had led the best life he could have lived, and he had loved his family and they had loved him, and he had had a wonderful time, and he had a great sense of humor. So he was an inspiration again in that regard. Now, when he died, of course, then all of the rest of us are left to grieve. And so once again, grief knocked me off my feet, but I knew how to manage it and how to deal with it because I had been practicing this, for so many years. And not that I don't get sad, not that I didn't grieve, as I would have, but I was able to also pull myself out of feeling sadness for, any extended period of time that would have been detrimental to my health or anybody else around me for that matter. So it's just again, I keep sounding like to myself that I'm oversimplifying things, but it really is. It's a lot of work, but it's something that I use all of the tactics and strategies that I've sort of gleaned from other people, including my father, in order to be a happy person. And one of those things is having a sense of humor. And I did inherit it from him, which is a good thing. And, it's funny because we meet other families that have kids with special needs. And so we always sort of tentatively ask them if they laugh at their children. I mean, not in a mean way,
Right.
But there are going to be circumstances that are comical. There just are. And so if we can have a sense of humor about them and about any situation in life, then I find that it makes it a lot easier to get through the tough times as well.
Right. Deb, you brought up a lot of good points there, and I want to touch on a couple of them. When you mentioned that grief, it's like when you experience grief, it stays with you, and it becomes a part of your character. And you mentioned how we go through happiness, disappointment, all these different emotions that are fleeting. But when grief comes along, it just starts to build into you, and you work around with it. And I just thought that was really interesting because I've never really thought about it like that before. And then another point I wanted to mention was, first I want to, can I get the title of your book? We're going to shout it out, and then I'm going to put it in the description of the video too.
Well, the short title, the main title is called Finding Your Hay.
Okay.
And it's a course in braving grief and embracing joy.
Okay.
And the title's a little bit obscure, but I'll just tell you why it's called that. When my dad had his heart attack and his stroke, so he was 46, I was 21, and he had the stroke 9 days after having his heart attack, actually. And so the first time that I went to the hospital to visit him after he had the stroke, I was walking down the hall towards his room, and I don't know how he knew I was coming down the hall. Now, the type of stroke, there's all different types of strokes. I don't know if you've heard that before, but some can impact you physically, some can impact your mental processing. I mean, the brain is just so complex. So what happened with him was he lost his speech. He was in speech therapy for 2 years, and he eventually got most of it back. He still talked with a slight impediment for the rest of his life, but in that first few months, he had lost his speech completely. So he lost his memory and his ability to process things really quickly. After a few months, he could actually still win games of Trivial Pursuit, but in that first, the brain is just, I mean, I'm not an expert on strokes, but his brain was just not functioning. So as I'm walking down the hall toward his room, I'm just dreading this. I mean, I'm 21. My dad is my hero. He's the funniest, he has so many stories and he's so smart. And I knew that this was going to be really tough to see him like this. So I'm walking down the hall, and all of a sudden he jumps out of his room, like leaps into the hall and just goes like this, "Hey!" And that was the only word I understood that entire visit, that entire day, because he had lost his speech. But I knew that, what he was doing was he was saying to me, it's okay, everything's going to be okay. Like I knew, because he knew that I would be completely freaked out, of course. But I think he also did it for himself. And for me, it became a symbol of his attitude in the face of his own grief, that kind of hey attitude. And so when I experienced the birth of my daughters and the subsequent grief that I felt with my daughter's disability, I thought, I have to find my hey. This is what I need to do. And so that's where the title of the book comes from.
That's such a beautiful story, Deb. I was really, as you're describing that story with your dad and him jumping out saying, "Hey," I was picturing the whole thing in my mind, and it just made me feel, kind of gave me chills a little bit. It's a really good story, and I love how you connected that to the title of your book. So Deb, I want to ask you. You kind of mentioned about having a sense of humor, and but I want to touch more on how do you access joy and live happiness in your life with the grief that you have experienced?
Well, I just made the decision to do it. And so, life is all an attitude, right? So I remember when my girls were young, and I would be walking down the street with them, pushing them in the stroller. If I saw another stroller heading toward me on the sidewalk, if it was a double stroller, I would always have to look inside the stroller. Sometimes it was siblings, like a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old sitting side by side. But if it was a set of twins, this is very melodramatic, but I would position this knife at my heart, right? Just ready to push it in. And if it was a set of little girl twins, oh my gosh, that knife went in. If it was a set of identical twin girls, well, I just pushed that knife right into my chest and just let the pain wash over me. And it was just so traumatic. So one day they were maybe about 3 years old, and they were still in the stroller. I mean, it was just easier that way. I'm sure Emma was walking by then, but anyway, so I was pushing them down the street, and I see a stroller approaching me from the other direction. It's a double stroller. And a voice inside my head said, "Just don't look." And it was my voice, but I was like, oh, okay. And so I didn't look. And the stroller passed by me. So there was no knife. There was no pain. I don't know if there were twins in there or not. And it just didn't matter. And so I remember laughing to myself, or at least smiling and thinking, oh my gosh, I have this decision that I can make. And so I've employed that tactic, that just don't look tactic, throughout the rest of my time with my girls. And I mean, it sounds a little bit like denial almost, but it's more of just changing my focus, redirecting what I choose to focus on. And by choosing to not go there, it's like when you have a sore tooth and you poke it with your tongue, we choose to do that, and I remember when Emma finally did realize that her sister was different. And so she would have been, I don't know, like I said, so maybe she was about 9 years old when she really started to notice that other people would stare at her sister. Now, she was never, embarrassed or ashamed of her, but she was very protective of her. Mm-hmm. So we would, walk down the street or walk into a room. And if she saw people staring at her sister, she would give them the dirtiest look. Like, honestly, I don't know how those people survived the looks that she would give them. And so I knew that this was difficult for her. Mm-hmm. So when I felt like, okay, I think she's mature enough to understand this, I told her about just don't look. And I said, when you walk into a room, I can see you looking at everyone. You're looking to see if anyone is staring at your sister. And I said, but you've got a choice. You don't have to, you don't have to check and see if anybody's staring at her. So I think that it was kind of a little sort of tactic that, she started to use it. I could see her sort of struggling with it still, but eventually, I know that was the choice that she has made, and she's used that in other ways as well. And so have I, that, you have a choice of what to focus on. Mm-hmm. And that's really helped me.
I love that, Deb. And you mentioned it earlier about, I think you said about when you focus on negative things, you're going to be negative, and it's the practice of changing your mindset and trying to focus on the positive things. And I think that's huge. That's a huge takeaway here, with a lot of things just in general in life, So I think that's huge. And I'd like to know, so we kind of just talked about it, choosing happiness, choosing to focus on the positive things. But during the kind of initial stages of loss and grief, what advice would you give to somebody who's just been through something and is grieving hard?
My only advice is to just wait it out. It's when you're in the throes of it and someone tells you to just think positively, you're going to want to slap that person because it might be impossible. Right. But just know that you and your body and your mind and your soul will be able to carry this. And you will grow in ways that will help to carry this grief. And it's, that saying that time heals all wounds. Well, of course it doesn't, but time is what it takes in order for you to build up your happiness and your forgiveness and your gratitude muscles. And they don't get stronger overnight, but it does take intention and it does take practice, but it is going to take time.
Right.
For sure.
Right. That's what I've come to realize as well. Dealing with my mom who's grieving right now, and I was that person who was like, I supported her, but I was like, oh, it's going to be okay. But it's really just a time thing. She needs to go through what she needs to go through. And at some point she will start to, be able to focus on the positive things and think about the good memories she had with her mom and be able to change a little bit. But time for sure is crucial in the beginning.
And, because the fact is that it's not going to be okay. When you lose someone, they are not coming back.
Right.
And it's more that you will learn to accept it and you'll get used to it. You'll just get used to them not being there, which is also sad in and of itself. But you will be able to bring other things to your life and and feel happiness and joy for the other pieces of your life that are still there.
Right. Right, Deb. I want to ask one kind of final question to kind of tie together everything we talked a little bit about. And what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned with dealing with your twin daughters, and as well as grieving for your dad?
Oh my gosh. I always say they've taught me so much. So they taught me that there are things that you can't change, and all we can do is learn to accept them. Best case scenario is that you can embrace those changes. You know, one of the things that I really resisted was the fact that my daughter would be in a wheelchair. I mean, when they were babies, they were still the same. They were both babies. They were in a stroller. And one of the things that I did to get used to it, I put a picture of a wheelchair on my fridge. So every time I had to pass by the fridge, because to me, it was the saddest word, the word wheelchair. And now I embrace that word. I embrace her wheelchair. I embrace the fact that she has it, that she can get around in it, and that it's part of her and it's part of our lives. And so it's really just about acceptance and then hopefully embracing this new normal that you're living in. Right.
Well, thank you, Deb, so much. I felt an emotional connection when you're speaking out that story with your father and saying hey, and I'm finding your book. I love that. We're gonna link that in the show notes. I'm gonna take a look at it right now. Can people find it on Amazon?
Yes, they can.
Okay, Finding Your Hey on Amazon. We're gonna take a look at that. Thank you so much, Deb, for coming on and speaking about grief with your daughters and your dad, and sharing the lessons that you've learned, and providing some advice for anyone who's going through grief right now. I'm gonna go ahead and close out the show, and then I'll just ask that you just stay on just for a little bit, okay? Don't take off quite yet.
Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you, Deb, for coming on the show. And for anyone who's watching, thank you so much for watching the Mental Wellness Show. Check out the Instagram at the Mental Wellness Show. We're active there every single day. And I believe this will be out on a Tuesday, so happy Tuesday, and we'll see you guys in the next video on Friday. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Deb, again for joining the show.
Thanks, Max.
All right, I'll go ahead and close it out.